Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the Human Element Series. This is episode 238. I'm Chris Hennege, CEO and founder of Social Engineer LLC, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering. And I've been hosting this very podcast since 2009. As always, this episode is sponsored by our company, Social Engineer. A lot of you have been asking about our 2024 training schedule, so please head on over to social-engineer.com. All of the courses are up there, and we even added some new ones. So we're looking forward to hear what you think about those, but you can find out more information on social-engineer.com. If you are interested in the topic of social engineering, if you're an enthusiast, it's just something you're really passionate about, we have a Slack channel. There's close to 2,000 people in there now every day talking about this topic. You can join us. It's family friendly and legal. Just want to make that clear. Okay. So if that's what you want, come on in. You can find the link in the show notes. If you can't find it, just ping me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to get you in there. We even have a job board. So if you're looking for a new job, you can come on in. We have companies that post jobs and we have people who are looking. Those matches have been made almost a dozen times now. So, hop on in and join us there. We look forward to seeing you. Also, everyone who's listening, I invite you to go check out innocentlivesfoundation.org. If you're not familiar with that foundation, it's a nonprofit that was started 6 years ago. A lot of us here volunteer there. The mission is to help law enforcement geolocate people who traffic children and create child abuse material. We worked really hard, and it's just the last couple of months, we hit over 500 cases now in the 6 years that we've been here. I'm really excited to announce that because that is a really big milestone for us over there. If you want more information on how to talk to your kids about this difficult topic, or if you like to volunteer or donate, you can find all that information on innocentlivesfoundation.org. If you like the music in the intro and the outro, it's none other than the best rock and roll band on earth, Clutch. Neil helped me start the ILF, so we're, of course, big fans, and I've been big fans of Clutch way before them. But if you want to check them out, you can do that, and the best way is just go see a show live because they're pretty awesome, and they're always on tour. And last but not least, if you like what you're hearing on this podcast, give us a thumbs up or a like. And your suggestions are really helpful. So when you suggest guests or topics, we take that really seriously. So you can put those in the comments, and we answer every comment. And we look forward to hearing from you and what you think about this episode, which brings us to our guest, which I'm really excited about today. Nick Hutchison is the visionary force behind Book Thinkers, a thriving 7-figure marketing agency bridging authors and readers. In just over 7 years, he's cultivated a platform that reaches over 1 million people every month and hosts the top 2% global podcast, Book Thinkers, Life-Changing Books. He features interviews with renowned authors like Grant Cardone and Lewis Howes. Nick's platform and services have empowered countless authors to reach millions of readers, driving substantial revenue and growth. His services encompass video production, podcast booking, social media branding building, as well as many other things. With a mission to inspire readers to take action, Nick authored his book, Rise of the Reader, which we'll talk about here on the podcast, delving into mastering reading habits and applying newfound knowledge to unlock a new potential. Nick, thanks for being on the show with me today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, Chris. You mentioned to me during the intro that every guest provides a book recommendation, but I'm curious, what's the best book that you've read in the last couple of years?
Wow, that is such a great question. Okay, you know what? I'm going to answer with what came to my head as soon as you asked that, because it was a book that I read finished a couple months ago, and it happens to be sitting right here. And it's this book by an author named Amy Herman called Fixed. And what I love about her, she's an art historian that took all of her knowledge of art to teach people how to critically think. So what she does is she takes pieces of art and she talks about what you see and how you feel, and then teaches you how to use this for like leadership type of skills. Fascinating read, because I'm not really an art buff, and it wouldn't have been something I would have tied together. But that book just fascinates me, and I think she's a fascinating author.
Well, I'm happy that I asked. Most of the time when I ask, guests on my podcast and stuff, I hear books that I've read before, but I've never heard of that book. So it has officially been added to the list.
Yes. Amy will be happy to hear that. Yeah, I love it. It's a really great book. And she's a fascinating woman. She had battled with cancer, and she's just so strong and just amazing. I've had a chance to have her on this podcast, a really wonderful guest too, and a great book. But thanks for asking. But let's talk about you. So, reading is not a topic that you get a lot on podcasts. So how did you get to where you are today? Like, what made you say, wake up one day and I'm going to start a whole enterprise around reading?
Well, what might surprise anybody that can see the video version of this podcast is that I have about 1,000 books behind me. But despite the evidence here, I was not much of a reader growing up. I was more of the athlete stereotype, not much of the academic. And that behavior, not wanting to do my homework, not reading my summer reading, that behavior continued with me into my college experience as well, until I took an internship going into my senior year. It was at a local software technology company. It was a sales internship. And my boss at the time, Kyle, I think he recognized some unfulfilled potential in me. I was sort of a young, cocky, know-it-all sales guy, and I thought I could just come into this small business and take over. And he said, "Hey, not so fast, buddy. I think you have some room to grow. And I think you could learn by listening to podcasts." So I had about an hour commute each way, 5 days a week. And Kyle said, check out some of these business podcasts where successful people are interviewed about what makes them successful. So there were a whole bunch of different shows that I started to listen to. And what I realized after a couple of weeks was that so many of the successful people being interviewed gave at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. Yeah. And now here I am, not willing to read. So I just kind of had this moment where it was like, hey, Nick, if you're deliberately choosing not to read, then you're also deliberately choosing to live under your potential. And I didn't want that to be the case. So I went to my local Barnes & Noble, got about 10 books, and the rest is history. I've been reading 50 or 60 books a year ever since.
That's some pretty awesome self-awareness, to be honest, because just to hear that and then realize to make that link, hey, I need to increase my success, and I'm not doing that because what I heard on this podcast. But now 50 or 60, that's impressive. So are you speed reading, or how are you managing that much reading of books?
Well, I value it so much that I prioritize it over a lot of other things, such as scrolling on social media or Netflix or time lounging around. So yeah, I read about a book a week, and have been for the last 10 years. And it's because these books have transformed every area of my health, my personal finance, my business, my relationships, my happiness, my headspace. And I just can't get enough of it. I almost have an insatiable curiosity to improve my life. And so I think that's why I'm choosing to read so much.
So let's say a listener is listening to this episode and they were like old Nick, they're like, I don't really like reading too much. So they're going to head to their Barnes and Nobles. How do they choose the right book to start with?
I think these personal development and nonfiction style books, they solve problems. So let's take a step back and use some of the self-awareness that you were just mentioning before. What problems are you facing on a daily basis that you just can't get rid of? I like to sort of say it like this. About 100 billion people have lived before us. 100 billion. Billions of them are living today. Now, out of all of those people, millions of them have written books documenting all of their greatest life lessons, how they overcame every problem, all of their solutions. It's all on the written page. And thousands of those books probably detail somebody else overcoming the same problem you're facing today. So for $20 and a few hours of your time, you can figure it out. I've heard it said like this too. If you're dealing with a problem on a daily basis over the next 30 years, so 365 times 30, you're going to deal with that problem about 11,000 times. So why not pause, take inventory, choose a good book, implement it, and solve that problem so that you don't have to deal with it 10,950 more times. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I think about starting your reading journey. Solve a problem in your life.
I love that. Okay. So, for me, when I read, I don't just like to read and turn pages. So like for me, every book that I have, like, when I grab a book over here on my side, there's a pen in it and like a highlighter, right? So I put a pen in the highlighter because I like to go through the pages. What do you do to remember all the content that you just said, a book a week? How are you remembering all that content? What's the best way to do that?
So I had a change in understanding, a change in vision, maybe a change in how I set my reading goals a couple of years ago. I used to optimize for retaining as much as possible. Now I optimize for implementing a manageable number of things from each book. So when I read a book, let's say it's to solve lead generation in my business. That's the problem that I'm facing. I'll find the book that will solve that problem. We could talk about that if you want to. And then I'll set an intention for the book that follows the SMART goal framework. So for anybody in your audience that isn't familiar with the SMART acronym, it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And so let's say I pick up $100 million Leads by Alex Hormozy. It's a new book on lead generation for businesses. Instead of just reading the book and hoping that it's going to change my life, or reading the book and trying to retain everything, I'll set a SMART goal. Something like find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies into my business book thinkers by the end of November. So that is specific. I know exactly what my goal is. It's measurable. Find and implement at least 2 things. It's attainable. I didn't say make $100 million. I just said implement 2 things. It's relevant to me, which means I'm emotionally connected to the outcome. That's going to keep me tied to the book and encourage me to take action. Because quite frankly, my business stinks at lead generation, and it's time bound. I said by the end of November. So I'm baking action into the goal. And instead of trying to retain as much as possible, I'm just looking to take action on at least 2 things. And so that's how I approach reading. I'm not saying that's the right way, but that's been the most effective way to create action, not retention. I mean, I definitely try to retain a lot too, but action is what I'm currently optimizing for.
I actually really love that suggestion. I'm gonna take that from you, because that sounds so much easier to make implementation. You know, like I'm highlighting all these things, I'm putting notes in columns, which I'll probably still do, but then I'm going back and I'm saying, okay, I like fold a page or put a star in a page and I want to go back to that particular one. But wow, when you're done with a book that has a lot of great knowledge in it, there can be like 100 points to go through, and that can seem overwhelming to do that. So I like your suggestion of picking out like 2 things to implement and then seeing how you can use that SMART acronym to do that. Did you come up with that? Was that something that you came up with to help you implement ideas and books that you were reading?
Well, the SMART acronym itself, I've read in other places, but applying it to the reading process, yes, I think I'm the first person to think about reading and approaching books this way. And it all started for me actually when I was attending a couple of conferences, and I heard somebody at a conference say, before you listen to any of the speakers, you want to make sure you set your intention for the day so that you don't get excited about all these miscellaneous opportunities for growth. You just filter for and key in on the things that are the most important to you so that your notebook doesn't go back on the shelf with all this amazing information and you don't change your behavior. So then I started to think about, okay, filtering for. You want to share your goal with the book so that it can share the information back with you. The reticular activating system in our brains, the filtering mechanism. If you say yellow car, now you're filtering for it. You'll see a bunch of yellow cars when you walk outside, right? They were always there. You didn't manifest them, but you're filtering for them. Our brains have bazillions of inputs all day long, and we can only make sense of what we're focused on. So when you define your intention for the book, find and implement at least 2 things related to lead mechanism. Okay. Now, what I'll actually do is I'll write that intention on the inside cover of the book, and I'll review it each and every time I read another chapter so that I'm telling my brain what to filter for. Don't get excited by everything. Just get excited by those opportunities to implement, and sort of carrying that example through the end of the book, because you mentioned part of your process. What I like to do is once I'm finished with the book, I'll go back through and I'll look for all of those things that I've highlighted or circled. Maybe there are 15 potential lead mechanisms I could implement in that example. But again, that's not realistic action. I remember reading Think and Grow Rich for the first time. I had like 100 things that I wanted to retain. Not realistic, right? So implementing 2 things, that's the goal. Well, not every activity is created equal. Some of them have more leverage. About 20% of those will probably lead to 80% of the change, right? We know the 80-20 principle exists almost everywhere we look. So I'll just analyze that list of potential actions, and then I'll make my decision. What do I want to implement? So I think that's been the most efficient way for me to get the most out of these books. Actually, you know what? Not the most out of these books, but the right things out of these books.
Okay. I feel like I jumped ahead a little, because now when you were saying that, I had a question that even starts before that whole section. So you said, and I think a lot of people listening, myself included, could include my thoughts, and lead generation is a problem here, right, at my company. So I go into whatever, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, whatever it is, and I go to a section for lead generation, and there are 7 million books in front of me on the shelf. How do I know which one to pick up and take because I'm not going to be able to read them all.
That's a great question too. And my thoughts have changed around this over time as well. I think sometimes you could ask a mentor because a mentor has a great broad understanding from a high level, what you're looking to implement and maybe has a good suggestion for you. You could turn to a trusted book recommendation tool like my company, Book Thinkers. I love when people DM us and ask us for book recommendations, and we'll probably ask some follow-up questions, but then we'll provide a custom book recommendation because, between me and the rest of my team, we've read over 1,000 of these books on business and personal development. But then also, if you're just in a platform like Amazon, I definitely have a couple of tips and tricks. I think the older the book, the better. Because those books have stood the test of time. And if they're constantly being purchased and recommended and reviewed, it means they're good, right? Cliches are cliches for a reason because they stand the test of time. I think best-selling old books for a reason. They always provide value and they're typically about first principles thinking, right? Getting back to the basics and doing things the right way. They're not flashy. You're not going to hear crypto and all these kind of other things, right? It's about what's always worked. Then I would say whatever has the most reviews, because working in book marketing, it's very hard to get a first sale, right? And that's what a lot of book marketing companies optimize for. They want the first sale, but only a good book is then sold multiple times after that first purchase, right? Because the techniques in the book work and word of mouth viral potential is baked in because it's good. And only good books really sell bazillions of copies because okay books, they'll sell, they might get 1,000 Amazon reviews in the first 6 months, but then they'll just kind of stop. When you're looking at Amazon reviews, I have kind of a fun suggestion here. I would say ditch the 5-star reviews and ditch the 1 and 2-star reviews. For the most part, those are written from a place of emotion, either too positive or too negative. But if you go for the 3 and 4-star reviews, those are written from a place of logic. Those are not written by friends of the author or people in their network. They're not spam. They're real people saying, I liked the book, but, and then they'll talk about what was missing from their perspective. So I think that's a great place to get some additional context. Ditch the 5 stars. Just look at the 3 and 4.
I like that suggestion because, being an author myself, I know I've gotten some bad reviews because of a wet book delivery. Right? Like Amazon delivered the book. It was wet and somebody gave me a 1-star review because the book was wet. And I'm like, wait, that's not about the book. I'm like, how can you give me 1 star? You didn't even rate the content. You were mad at Amazon, right? I like that suggestion because I don't think I've done that before. Ditch the 5-star. I go in and I read some 5-star reviews and I'm like, wow, that sounds really great. So I like that idea with the emotion not being there. 3 and 4 stars. That's really going to help you balance that feeling about the book. Okay, so we talk about how to choose the right one. Now you gave us the principles of writing that intention on the cover, how to go through the book. But now it's like, how do I take better action on the notes? So we got through that whole part. I got my notes. Now how do I take better action on those notes that I produced through reading the book?
In my book, Rise of the Reader, I do a deep dive on a few different implementation techniques, but we can talk about 1 or 2 here. We'll talk about my 2 favorite. So number 1, going back to that measurable piece of the goal, Peter Drucker, a legendary management guru, he always said, what's not being measured can't be managed. What's being measured improves. So his goal was measure things. You need to have a baseline for performance, and then you need to apply what you're reading in a measurable way. So anyway, long story short, I detail in the book how to build out an activity tracker to actually measure the implementation of each individual action that you take from a book. And so it's sort of a Monday through Sunday. There are weekly goals, monthly goals, quarterly, yearly. And you track Monday through Sunday. You set a goal. I'd like to try to implement this once this week. And then at the end of the week, it tells you whether or not you've implemented it. And there's room for feedback. And I talk about how to build out this tracker. And then when you combine this activity tracker, which again measures your activity, with an accountability group that meets on a weekly basis and looks at your activity, I think that's where the magic happens. So there's a lot of power in working and implementing information with your most motivated friends. I started an accountability group with some of my friends 5 or 6 years ago, and we meet every single Friday. And although the group has changed and the format has changed quite a bit, we're all reading independently. I can show up to that meeting and say, hey, I just read this in $100 million leads. I'm going to choose to implement these 2 activities this week. And next week, if I show up and I haven't implemented them, everybody's going to give me a hard time. So it's sort of like an external form of accountability. And it's all visible within my activity tracker. So they can hold me accountable to it. They all have visibility to it. And so it's kind of like a, 2 birds with 1 stone type of situation. But I think when you marry those two techniques together, a lot of magic can happen.
No, those are great tips. So you brought it up a couple times. Let's talk about your book, Rise of the Reader. What made you write it? What is your hope that it gives to the person who's reading it? What's it really about?
Over the years of building my community on social media, Book Thinkers, which, as you mentioned, now does over 1 million organic impressions a month, we're recommending books. We're talking about taking notes from books and all sorts of things. And I've received hundreds of the same questions. Some of the same questions that we've talked about today. How do you choose the right book? How do you take effective notes? How do you implement what you're reading? And here's the thing. I am definitely motivated by impact. I love being able to positively impact the people in my community. So every single time I got a question, of course I'm answering it. But I was limited in my ability to answer by the format that I was responding in. Like Instagram DMs, you can only type out so much, or an email, you can only type out so much. 15-minute Zoom call to answer a question, you can only say so much. So I felt like I was sort of underserving the people that I was attempting to serve the most. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I started to realize was that a lot of the behavior that I had never really defined it. Like I'd never taken the time to articulate and define what I was doing to implement books. So I knew that would be a big project to sort of take my own behavior and what's in my brain and put it on paper in a way that other people could understand it. So I just came to the realization that I think this is a book. It's a book about implementing books. And third, there's no leverage in answering every single person individually, right?
Yeah.
MJ DeMarco, who wrote a great book called The Millionaire Fastlane, he was telling me that for a while, he was driving around a Lamborghini. And every time somebody would ask him, how do I get a Lamborghini? What do you do? He would just hand them a copy of the book. So I sort of had that dream where somebody goes, how do I implement more from books? And I go, here's the answer. So that's why I decided to write it. And inside of that book, I have detailed my journey and all of my best recommendations for getting the most out of the other personal development, nonfiction, and business books that you read. Because there's an opportunity cost to reading something and not fully implementing it. These books are capable of solving every single problem that we have if we use them the right way. And that's my promise to the reader, is that by the end of my book, you'll know exactly how to implement books efficiently.
That's a great, I love the storyline about why you wrote it. And then when you were saying that, I was thinking about our company. We get, like, the one question we get all the time is, how can I get into your industry? We must have answered that question 1 million times until eventually I said, let's write a blog on it. And that way, when someone asks it, we could just pop a link in that email and send it out, because I was getting tired answering that question on a weekly basis, writing out, copy pasting that same email. So you had the same thought. You turned it into a book with actual implementable strategies. That's kind of fascinating. When did the book come out?
The book launched November 1st. Well, let's see. We're recording this in late October. So the book launches officially November 1st, 2023. So depending on when you're listening to this, the book is probably out and available in all formats.
It is out because this is December 11th when this podcast is released. So you can get it right now, hot off the press.
Hot off the press with that book.
So where do you see it going from here? This empire you built around books, it's, 1 million impressions a month. There's not a fly by night, a happenstance there. So what comes next from all of this work that you're doing about reading?
I appreciate the question, Chris. And this has changed a lot over time too. So whenever I used to think about the future, I would envision something that was very different from my present moment. I was always aiming for something different. But that gap is closed a lot. And now when I think about the future, I think about being a little bit healthier, a little bit wealthier, having my business be a little bit bigger, impacting a few more people, maybe I'm a little happier. I don't know if I can get happier, but you know what? I'm currently enjoying the passage of time, and I just want to stay in this moment and do as much as possible to improve it. And so I don't know, what does the future look like? I mean, a bigger platform, a bigger podcast, more books. We just hosted our first in-person event about a month ago. So we'll host more events for authors and podcasters and book marketers. But you know what? I'm just a happy guy. And I just want to do more of the same.
So the job that you had when that guy said, you need to listen to some podcasts, what were you doing for that? Like, what was the industry you were in?
So transportation management technology, specifically the intermodal transportation management technology space.
I asked that because that's such an interesting divergence, right? So you're in this transportation technology. Guy tells you to listen to some podcast. That turns you into an avid reader. And now you're running a book reading empire. It's just like that trajectory doesn't even make sense, right? It doesn't make sense.
I owe him a lot. Yeah. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
But I love the storyline because a lot of times when we have guests on and you're like, how did you get to this moment in time? There was no, most of them didn't wake up one day like a Steve Jobs kind of thing and go, I planned this when I was a kid and it became true. It's like, they kind of just stumbled into things and here it happened. And now they're doing amazing things for themselves and the world. And it's like, I didn't even think I can do this for a living. So I love that story.
Yeah. If there are aspiring entrepreneurs in your audience, I've got a couple of things that I think are unique about my story that I don't mind sharing. So one of them is that I had this full-time sales job and I was not passionate about the industry of transportation management technology, but I was passionate about sales, marketing, communication, and business. So by day, no, not 100% of it was aligned with the book, empire that exists today. But my ability to run a business and to communicate effectively, I was developing those skills in the form of a 9-to-5. And Book Thinkers started as a side hustle that was really like a 5 to 9. And although there was no industry overlap, there was a skill overlap because I was learning things that I still use today. Book Thinkers, I wanted to jump very soon. Like I wanted to jump right into this business. And I had a mentor tell me early on, he said, Nick, don't jump off the cliff and try to build the parachute on the way down. He said, build the parachute, meaning like a financial safety net or have some success in the business first before you jump. It's a lot less risky. He told me sort of a Michael Gerber thing. He said 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years because they run out of money. And if you jump too soon, you'll start discounting recklessly. You'll compromise on your integrity. Scarcity mindset will bleed into your decision making. Prospects will feel that. He said, you're going to end up failing. So slow and steady wins the race. No matter how many times you read Aesop's fable, the tortoise and the hare, the tortoise wins every time. And I didn't jump. I stayed in that full-time position and I built Book Thinkers as a side hustle. And just to talk about how far I went with that risk mitigation, I had full-time employees and the business was doing over 6 figures a year in revenue before I decided to take the jump. So I think sometimes, patience wins at a macro level. You just have to kind of be patient and like really work at this thing. Keep your core values strong. Don't compromise. Don't make money ruin your business. You know what I mean? So those are a few of the things that I've learned during that transition.
That may be like a college level education in business management right there, or entrepreneurship. That is I feel, and I could be wrong, against not much of the advice you hear. Many times you hear people just jump in, take the risk. It's worth the risk. But your methodology seems to have, it seems to be so much better. I mean, I love the analogy of don't jump off the cliff and try to build the parachute on the way down. I think a lot of us have done that, and it usually ends up being a little messy. Even if you get the parachute built, there's got a hole in it somewhere, Yeah.
And the ones that are perpetuating that idea of just jump, like they're the ones that did succeed, but you forget about the other 19 out of 20 that failed that aren't telling that story, right? So yes, people can be wildly successful and start Apple in their, in their garage or whatever, but like that is a very small sample size to judge your behavior on.
Yeah, it really is. I love it. Okay. So I know you read, obviously hundreds of books, if not more. How are you going to boil it down when I ask you this question about, can you give me maybe one or two of your favorite books?
I have a lot of favorites. I'll say this. I've read over 500 books in the last 10 years. Wow. And 5% of them have probably created 95% of the change. So I probably have a top 25, but I will share two of the top 25 for me. The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy is one of my all-time favorite books. It's sort of the predecessor to Atomic Habits. It talks about how small steps in the right direction, repeated over a very long period of time, will lead to disproportionately positive outcomes, aka exponential progression, that hockey stick curve that we all dream about in business. And so, for instance, the same activities that I was doing in 2017 and 18 when I was first starting my social media presence, creating content, posting every day, I was only reaching 10, 15 people per post. Now that same activity today, years later, I haven't broken the consistency. We post every single day. Years later, that same activity, every time we post, it reaches 25, 30, 50,000 people, whatever the numbers are. And so that's the thing, is show up every single day. The actions that you take today are a vote for who you're going to be tomorrow. And the Compound Effect is a great reminder to take small steps, which are more manageable and achievable than those giant jumps that we all try to do.
I love that. I haven't read that book either, so that's definitely going on the list. So thank you for that. And what's your second one?
Well, when I think about why I enjoy my lifestyle so much, it comes back to this concept of lifestyle design that I learned about in the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. So Tim Ferriss, internet entrepreneur, angel investor, big time podcaster. The 4-Hour Workweek was written, I think, 12 or 13 years ago. So some of the techniques in there around outsourcing are a little bit outdated. But Tim says in the beginning of that book that reality is negotiable, that the new rich, they value time and mobility over income. And I was working a standard 9 to 5, right? I was in that cubicle setting at that sales position. And, here I am now. My wife and I have been fortunate enough to travel to over 25 different countries in the last 5 years, sometimes for up to a few months at a time. My entire business is built as a remote business. Everybody works remotely. We use Slack as an internal team kind of communication mechanism. And it was all designed with those constraints on purpose, because what fuels me outside of reading and implementing books and working in my business is travel and freedom. And Tim taught me that we're all capable of designing a life that's uniquely fulfilling to us. One of the coolest things that I've learned from that book is to audit my calendar. So every couple of months, I'll go into my calendar and I'll look at a week's worth of activity, and I'll change the events to green if they brought me energy, yellow if they were neutral, and red if they took energy from me. And I will then, using Tim's frameworks, automate, delegate, or eliminate any of the stuff that took my energy, or sometimes what was neutral, because I just want my calendar to bring me energy, and I just want to do things that make me happy. And we're all capable of doing it if we follow the instructions of other people that figured it out, right? And Tim figured it out for himself, and I'm just kind of replicating his behavior. So that's book recommendation number 2.
I mean, I wish we could have just taken the whole 30, 40 minutes and just talked about book recommendations, because I love the way you don't just recommend them, but you actually talk about what you got from it. That's very, very valuable. One of the things that you mentioned about having a mentor, I've been asking this question too for years on this podcast, is most of us didn't get to where we are without the help of some key people. Even if they didn't know they were our mentors, but for many of us, it was a direct mentor or two. Can you think of any people that you could name that you would say are your mentors?
Yes. I define a mentor as somebody who has done what you want to do, has done it really well, and has also helped other people get there. So there are a few kind of things when I think about mentorship. The gentleman that recommended that I don't build the parachute on the way down, his name is Kevin Horsley. He's the author of a book titled Unlimited Memory. Talk about an impressive human being. He memorized the first 10,000 digits of pi in a memory competition.
What?
Yes. Literally wild. So they'd be like, what's digit number 7,221? And he'd know it.
What?
Yeah.
My brain doesn't even understand how that's possible. What was the name of his book?
Unlimited Memory. Yeah. Another book recommendation.
Yeah, seriously.
And I still meet. So it's been 5 or 6 years. I still meet with Kevin every single week. In fact, he was the call that I just got off before this one. Kevin's a wonderful business mind. So he's been an amazing mentor to me. And outside of Kevin, which I know you're probably still 10,000 digits.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And funny enough, he grew up with learning disabilities too. So he was told sort of by the system or by society that he wasn't a smart guy. And then boom, he just realized it was a memory organization problem, not a memory problem. So outside of that, I'll just say my parents as well, both my mom and my dad. I grew up in the ideal household. You know how a lot of times people, they say like, well, when I'm a parent, I'm going to change this, and this. Like, I just want to replicate what my parents did. There was nothing too fancy or extreme, but they just supported us and gave us every opportunity. We had presents under the tree and room to play. And that's all. It was just the best opportunity ever. So I call it like the white picket fence household. And they were big mentors of mine, and they've always supported everything that I've done, whether it's leaving my job and starting a business or pivoting from like jock into book nerd, like whatever it is, they've always got my back.
That's really nice, actually. You know, a lot of times people who come on who've had some success, they have a hard story. You know, like they'll say, oh, my parents are my mentor, but, I only had my mom and she worked really hard and, it wasn't a very easy life. And so I kind of like having a different one where you're like, my parents rocked and they gave me a great household. That's kind of it's a little refreshing, I think, to have that story as opposed to the normal one. So
I think so too. I think sometimes people, they turn up the drama a little bit. There are plenty of stories that are horrific and terrible, and people have overcome a lot of amazing things, but a lot of times people do try to ramp up the drama a little bit. I think, yes, I almost had to like artificially create a chip on my shoulder because things were just, I had no major problems. So, in order to be a wolf amongst wolves, right? To like be uncommon amongst the uncommon, go out there and start a business and take over the world. It was like, I had to create a little bit of my own drama in my head to make that happen.
I love it. So listen, we're going to put a link to your book in the show notes. But if people want to connect with you, they want to chat with you or learn more from you, what's the best way for people listening to do that?
One of my favorite things to do is play a book matchmaker role. So I love to provide custom book recommendations. If anybody wants one, DM me, direct message me at Book Thinkers on Instagram and tell me about a problem that you have that you just can't get rid of, or tell me about a skill set that you want to develop or something in between. And I'll probably ask some follow-up questions, but I will provide a custom book recommendation to you. Like I said, it's one of my favorite things to do. And from there are links to everything.
You're going to be hearing from me on that one. Okay. So I'm going to do it before I release this podcast. So you don't have a million people getting to you. That's so nice, by the way. What a nice thing to do for people. I mean,
thank you.
I'm sure you get a ton of DMs, especially when you announce that, because I can't imagine how many people are out there going, like, just my question, going into Barnes and Nobles and picking a lead generation book would be so difficult, and having someone that's like, oh, I can recommend a few. That's a really nice thing.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, over the last couple of years, I think I've realized that impact, like the impact that I make on people, it's only felt when there's feedback. And so I try to create opportunities for me to share individually. And then I'll even follow up and see what people thought of the book. Like I have a whole spreadsheet system where I'll say, I recommended to Chris $100 million leads on October 28th or whatever today is. And then I'll set a reminder for 90 days or 60 days to reach back out and see what you thought, because that's why I do what I do. Like I'm in the game of trying to create behavior change. And so, yeah, that offer is available for everybody and anybody. I can't get enough of it.
That's an interesting, that's interesting that you do that. That's very much like a mentorship, right? Maybe it's not long term, but I think of that, like we do the same thing here when people reach out and they're like, hey, I really want to get into your career. What can I do? We give them some recommendations, and then I'll follow up and be like, so how is it going? And if they're like, oh, I didn't really start, well, you're probably not going to hear from me again. Right. But if you're on the path, oh man, I've worked with people for years, helping them get into the career, because every time you say something like, I'm going to go do that, or I'm going to go read that, or I'm going to go take that course. And then you're like, that person's motivated. Like I want to see them succeed.
Right.
So I really love that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show, Nick. This has been a truly fascinating conversation. Really great to meet you and to have you here on the Social Engineer podcast. So thanks for coming on.
Well, one of the themes in my book, Rise of the Reader, is gratitude. So I'll just say I'm grateful for the opportunity, grateful for you. Great questions today. And I look forward to a collaboration with you and anybody in the audience that wants a book recommendation. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm very grateful.
You're welcome. And thank you all for listening to us this month. Until next month, when we have another great guest on, stay safe and stay secure. Until then, see you.